Okay, we ended up finishing the installation of all of our wall insulation. Now we can go ahead and move to our ceiling. One preparation that we need to do before actually putting the insulation in, again, you want to make sure that all of your electrical is run, or if there's any HVAC in the ceiling, make sure that's run. But we also need to put in some of these air baffles. And basically what this does, we have our overhang where our soffit's going to go on the outside. That soffit is going to be ventilated. And that's for the reason because we need to basically vent our attic space. If we went ahead and basically sealed our attic up, we have the roof sheathing on the top with the shingles over it. If we didn't put any vents in our soffit and basically made airtight space, basically what's going to happen is that cold and warm zone, cold outside and warm inside, it's going to condensate, and all that condensation is going to be on the back of our sheathing. So we need to have a vented soffit, and it needs to be able to be vented out the peak of our roof. We're going to have some ridge vent on the peak of our roof, which will basically bring air up through the soffits and then out our peak of the roof, making sure we have a good circulation of air. So we're going to be putting some insulation up in here, and what we want to avoid doing is running that insulation tight to this roof sheathing. If we run that insulation tight to that sheathing, that will block off any airflow from our soffit here. We have a open space up here that air can come through. So what we do to make sure that we have an open space is we put these air baffles in. These will sit nice and tight. Just like this up into our roof cavity here. We'll staple this to the underside of our sheeting. And now basically, I'll grab another one here. Once we staple that to the ceiling, these little cones on the backside here will keep this from going tight. And we've basically now just made an air channel for circulating air to be able to travel up through. Once this gets secured to the roof here, we have our bottom of our air baffle actually inserted into the soffit area. That way our insulation can go right up tight to this air baffle and insulate our home. So we'll let this hang here. So if you can kind of imagine, we have a little bit of insulation sitting on the top plate here, and then we have the insulation keeping this part of our home warm. So we have a good, strong connection of insulation here to be able to keep out any cold drafts. And then we have that ventilation behind this air baffle for air to get up to our attic space. So we'll go ahead and put these air baffles in each cavity, and then we'll be ready to install the insulation. Okay, our air baffles are now in place and we are ready to start insulating the ceiling. So I got my ceiling insulation here. You may notice this stuff looks just a little bit different than what we just installed in the walls. This particular insulation is fiberglass insulation with a craft face on it. And basically that's just a paper coating. And what that paper coating does is it's going to act as the vapor barrier for this insulation. So once the insulation's in place, you put a vapor barrier over it, so any condensation or any drafts will be stopped with this barrier. So there is an option to do craft face on the walls as well. I prefer not to use it just because I think plastic is a much better vapor barrier. Basically, this little wing here would then go onto the stud, and then you can staple this to the stud, and then the next sheet overlaps that and you staple it. I'm not a big fan of that just because there's a lot of seams, and plastic just creates a much better seam with seam tape. So the only reason why I use it on the ceiling is it helps to keep the insulation up in the ceiling, and then I'll go ahead and put plastic over that as well. So this is very straightforward and similar to wall insulation. Basically, we'll get our ladder in place here. It just happens to work out that these are pre-cut to the length of our ceiling. But what you would normally do is you would, if you had a long roll of this, you would go ahead and cut it to the length of your cavity. And then you would just start putting it in place. So again, this paper will help us to keep this insulation in place. I'm just going to use some staples and staple it up to the ceiling joists. All right, so this whole ceiling is basically exactly the same. We'll just keep putting it in place, unfolding our paper flap here, and stapling it to the ceiling. So we'll go ahead and get all of these installed, and then we'll be ready to demonstrate the vapor barrier.